a massive welcome to Ash Devine. Hello.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. The very first guest on Venn's Quop. So,
It is an honor,
uh,
true privilege.
well, no, I mean, amazing. I'm so glad I managed to catch you and see you in real life via the internet. As these things go these days. But
You
it's
find all
great.
great things, the internet.
I know, right?
Yeah,
All these great connections that can still happen. So, gotta stay positive about some things, I guess.
yeah.
So, tell us then. So, who is Ash Divine? What do we need to know?
Ash Divine is, you know, divine is something which I'm not a religious person, but I do um, love the idea if there's a certain mystery about life and, the idea of creating something and where it comes from, and the idea that what you create is something people connect with and that people love is just something truly magical. And there's no science that I can, create data around. There's just a magical thing that happens in our human experience. And I think to me, that's divine. I'm not a religious person, but divinity to me shows up in the beauty of the world that exists around us and in the beauty that people are able to see and feel with the work you and I create, you as a musician as well. So I think that's divine. And that's why my name's Ash Divine, because I feel very grateful that whatever the energy is that's picked me as a device to create through, um, I feel very grateful for that. And then the other piece is, all of our listeners, as you know, as a musician yourself, our listeners are truly people who remind us that the work that we are making is impacting, is connecting with them. And so going with the sort of divine, slightly religious theme, they're sort of it might sound a little Judeo-Christian, but they are angels in a way, in this beautiful way where they are surrounding you with their presence. So my listeners call themselves angels because of this divine thing, but really Ash Divine is a musician first and foremost. I create, and that's my survival, and that's my thriving is creating. And the music I create, I strive to give people music that is fresh, that hasn't been done before.
Mm.
Um, I believe that there isn't any point doing something that's been done before. I want to add to this giant, beautiful over that, the body that, music as a form is for humanity is such a gift.
Absolutely. And I think you, yeah, you're creating such interesting music as well that really I think that's how I kind of first came about was actually through more of your visuals as
Yeah.
well. And then I was like, oh wow, like this music is really interesting. And my background in music is classical music. And although I sort of talk about being unashamedly pop and loving pop music, which I do, but
Right.
I really love just the different sounds that you're using and how you kind of orchestrate your sound and the structure of your songs as well. It's like not what you're expecting, but I would still call it pop music as well, or particularly kind of queer pop, I guess, which is what I'm kind of exploring with this show and this playlist. I mean, is that something that you identify with, like talking about queer pop as a genre, whatever it may be? I mean, I'm not entirely sure I know myself, but
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much to unpack there.
mm,
Uh, the first thing, I mean, I didn't realize you were a composer or coming from a classical music background
mm.
because I've only heard your more poppy synth pop stuff, which I love, by the way.
Thank you
Uh,
very much.
I studied composition and voice in college, and my first album, Mother, where the tone I'm striking is really of heartbreaking loss because that was my relationship with the maternal figures I had in my life, is all an orchestral album. It is where I brought my compositional um, being into the fore and combine it with electronics. So it's sort of it's a bit Bjorky in a way, where
Yeah.
these big 15-piece ensembles playing this grand, massive landscape music, and then there's the electronics in there, and then voice, of course. So that's Mother. But after Mother, the new album, which is the sex issue is a complete turnaround. It's much more boppy, much more poppy. It's quite danceable, but I wanted to give a complete entire spectrum. And I wanted it to work for really any listener, whether they're passive or active listening, alone or in a party with people, and whether they're queer or not queer. But I do want to bring a queer lens to it, which is why I think, it ties into this idea of queer pop, where not as a, oh, look at this special sub-genre, subculture. I want to change the face of pop music as it's been defined, because this is, as queer people, we have the license because of where we come from to create change.
Hmm.
And I think it's time pop music was expanded to include a queer perspective as a mainstream perspective, and to include not music that just rooted in Greco-Roman classical tradition as a part of the pop form. In my music, I'm bringing a lot of the Indian or South Asian forms,
Mm.
which haven't been used in pop music before, in the Western world. So that's all very exciting to me. So
Yeah,
queer
no, definitely.
to me gives us a license to change the face of pop music.
And in the track Unfurler, which you're going to be hearing in a bit on the show, and you mentioned, yes, so one of these structures that you used is a particular device. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I spent time in India to understand the roots and where I come from, because I wasn't exactly raised in a very traditional Indian way. So I wanted to spend time to understand the culture and absorb the culture for um, as I could interpret it, as opposed to somebody else giving it to me. So in
Mhm.
that journey, I discovered many forms of music. A lot of that was tribal music, folk music, Indian pop music, and India, just like Europe, was small little kingdoms and provinces and states, and you cross from one state to another state in India, which is now a single country. The language changes, the script of the writing actually changes. It's so different. The food entirely changes. You cross the border, like when you cross from Spain to France, or from France to Spain, you can actually feel the trains slow down, because trains in Spain are slower than the trains in France.
Right.
The same thing happens in India. So the sounds are so diverse. So for this particular song, Unfurler, I am bringing together uh, this style, this format called Panvani, which comes from central India, and it is a very call and response. It's sort of it's got the same spirit as gospel, but it's a
Mm.
different format from a different part of the world, and a different origin than gospel, but very similar in spirit. Oppression and that sort of thing emerged, created that form. I wanted to bring that into pop music. So the choruses you hear are very different than a regular pop song chorus, and they're harmonized, but they also sound like a group of people in a circle, in a community, responding. And that's the sound I brought into Unfurler. There's another thing that I'm doing on Unfurler, which is combining my classical music, chamber music background with pop music, and the South Asian form. There's another form called Jugal Bandi, which basically means there are two voices. One is a narrator, the other is a support of the narrative. And the two voices are my vocals, which is the lead voice, and the support of the narrative is the marimba. So there's a marimba line through the entire thing. So there's this chamber element aspect to it. So it's a very complex composition, but it doesn't feel complex when you listen to it. And then the other thing that's happening in that song is it's not a regular pop format. It's not verse, chorus, verse, chorus. It is done in a format that when you're telling a story, and how, the idea is being reinforced by the choir, the chorus.
Mm.
So that's what's happening.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. It's really, yeah, interesting to hear behind that and behind that structure, but somehow in the way that you present it, or maybe in the production of it, does feel poppy, but unexpected, and you're kind of like jumping into these different sections, and you don't quite know what's coming next. I just,
Love
yeah, I think it's
it.
really exciting. I love it.
I mean, on the album, there are songs which have repeated structures and they have a proper pop format, or the ronda format, for example. It starts, the repeatable, the chorus hooks, etc. But this song I wanted to really push, and it was a controversial decision for my team and I to for me to release this as a single, because this is not a traditional pop song. To put a visual around it, to put a music video that's the quality it is, it was questionable for some people on the team. But I was like, no, we've got to push it. We've got to make a change. Yeah, let's take the
Well,
lessons.
I'm glad you did. And there you go. There, my first show talking about pop music, and I'm already talking about classical classical music. It's great. I love it. Um, and so you're talking about your videos and your visuals. So for anyone listening, you should and watching, go and check out those videos straight away, because there's quite a few of them now, and yeah, really amazing. I wonder if you could just tell me a little bit about the creation of those and maybe the team that you're working with. Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's start with a very basic idea, which is music appeals to primarily to our auditory or sonic sense through our ears. In order for it to fully come to life, and the world we live in today, and that's been the historical tradition, like music is accompanied with dance or some visual to really bring a full experience. To the music, or there's a beautiful orchestra and a great, beautiful stage setting which creates context. So we need something beyond audio to create context, and I use the visual vehicle to do that. And also, we live in a world which is very social media heavy, and it's a you and I are talking on Zoom. It's a very visual thing.
Hmm.
So you have to add. I want to add a visual element to the album I'm releasing. So it's really a visual album in the way Beyonce has done. She keeps releasing these visual albums in the way Solange is doing.
Yeah.
What happened to be sisters, and so I wanted this to be a visual album, but I also wanted to make sure that because every song has its own theme, its own spirit, it's its own being, individual being, the visual also has to be an individual being. So these are, you can almost see these are small mini films, a collection of mini films. The first was Common Questions, then came BBC, which is an interesting song, an interesting topic, which stirred up a bunch of controversy, but we will talk about that.
Yes, that's
There's, of course, Unfurler, and then Jungly. So these four videos are already out. And then there's one more to come out with the drop of the album. You asked about the team. I chose to work with only non-male producers and directors.
mm,
And I wanted to, and I chose to hire only talent, dancers, and cast, which are either non-binary or trans or people of color or queer people, because we get each other, we understand what otherness is, and we are undoing it by actually making these choices. And undoing it, otherness is a choice, as I've seen very clearly, that some people choose to make that choice and some people don't make that choice. And I, as a musician and as an artist, have the license to change. And this is where it begins. And so we do it for each other, and we are having fun doing it. So, yeah.
yeah, amazing. And it's such a great thing to see and to hear that, and the thought behind that as well. That all the thought that goes into these amazing productions that you're creating.
Yeah, and I mean,
Um,
if you as you watch the videos, most of the cast is either non-binary or trans, and you know you see that on a show like Pose. Have you watched Pose?
mhm, yeah, I've not watched it all, but I've seen a few episodes. I need
It's
to do some more catching
gorgeous.
up. Yeah.
It's beautifully produced, and it's an entirely, mostly a cast of trans people playing trans roles.
Mhm.
And we want to do that for music videos. It's a new way of making choices, and
Yeah.
so it's very exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, there's always those choices that you can make. And I think that's what kind of got me started, I guess, on this journey of this year in terms of creating this playlist um, of queer pop, and just wanting to find what I actually thought was a really kind of small world. I never really saw where I was within that and what my music was part of. And then as soon as I kind of scratched the surface, I was like, whoa, like amazing. There's so many queer pop, however we define pop, but musical artists out there doing amazing things, and yet not bound by that, by music or whatever their identity is within the queer spectrum. Um,
So
but
when did you come up with the idea? And what are some revelations, like key things you've learned so far on your journey?
um, well, I guess that was start of this year, maybe like March time. I think maybe when I was sort of getting ready to release my first single of this year, and I think in terms of my own music before that and before this kind of particular project as Venn Smyth, doing my kind of queer performances or venues that I might have played in, or nights that I put on. I used to run like open mic nights and things as well. Um, were always kind of quite separate to then be trying to find music venues. And then sometimes I felt that I couldn't always be totally myself or explain my songs or the stories behind the songs as openly or as comfortably as I could in kind of queer spaces. But then also I had this thing of um, queer spaces weren't always featuring musicians as well, or it was always a particular type of pop music, or maybe more drag or kind of performance art, I guess. So I kind of sometimes felt that there wasn't that bit in between. And but then through just uh, working online to kind of find people and talk to people, I've just realized that there's so many more people doing that. I guess just doing music, but happen to be queer at the same time. And but I think a common thread is that it's storytelling, and that it's not just like throwaway pop music, I guess. But there's whichever angle anyone's coming from, and they're making queer music, there's always a story that's being told, I think, in there,
Yeah.
which I find really interesting.
And you say, and tell me if I need to stop interviewing you, but the
That's all right.
question about this, um, queer pop, is it by people who are queer, or is it for listeners who are queer? Because I can think of Rasheen Murphy or
Yeah.
Lady Gaga, for example. They have, and Charlie XCX, like they have massive queer audience,
Mm.
and they're also telling stories. So how do you think about that?
I think in particular what I've been doing is more finding queer made pop. So by people who would yeah, identify as being queer. Um, and I guess yeah, you can kind of expand out from that a bit as well. But I think it's important to kind of like how you're talking about the way that you make your music videos and the team that you get there as well. Um, as a playlister or and now someone who's showing music on radio, I think there's a choice that I can make, that I can make sure that it is queer voices and queer artists that I am um, pushing out there, because often they won't have the opportunities, and kind of the yeah, the team behind them, or the publicity that others might have as well. And I do, and I'm also conscious of making sure that when I add people to the playlist, that I'm also not just getting people who are like me, so white cisgender males, so that I'm always looking for people of color and non-binary female artists as well, so that it's not always just white gay men. Um, so I think that's also a choice that I'm consciously trying to make as well.
That's
Um,
incredible, and thank you for being the change.
well, I mean, um, it's funny just because a lot of this stuff is just such small little things. It's just realizing what you're doing, and sometimes, yeah, it's easier just to go with or not even consider it. And I've got that privilege that I don't have to consider these things. But I think in particular this year, I'm just starting to think about this more, and how, yeah, in my own little sphere of influence, which is not huge, but I can still make little changes
Yeah,
um, where I can.
absolutely. We must.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's been so great chatting to you about your music and everything behind it as well. A couple more questions for you. Have you?
Yeah.
What is next on your agenda? What are you excited about that's coming up?
So the first and foremost is the album, The Sex Issue, which we should talk about what that album means
Yes,
entirely.
absolutely.
But we'll put a pin on that for now. We'll get to it. The album, The Sex Issue, with a single called Pulchritude of Floss, is coming out
Mhm.
December 4th. And with that drops the entire album. I am going to be finally opening up. You heard it first here. I haven't even shared it with my listeners who are so
Exclusive.
special. I'm
Come the guitar.
going to announce that I am exactly. I'm about to open up vinyl for the record.
Ah,
And
amazing.
vinyl is a very special vinyl because it's got two tracks, which will not be on Spotify,
Cool. Okay.
any digital platforms. Then we are going to also open up for CDs and cassette tapes. Cassette tapes are hotcakes. In my past releases, too surprisingly, people love tapes. Um,
Yeah. So, okay. Can I can I
yeah,
ask about
yeah.
cassette tapes? Are people playing them, playing this cassette tape, or is it just more like an art object collector item? Do you
That's a question. I don't know what they're doing with it. And maybe neither, maybe both. I don't know. I mean, the tapes that I make, they are, everything I make is limited edition because, my distribution isn't, I'm not selling through Walmart. I'm selling through, Amoeba or Rough Trade or like the
know?
smaller independent record stores, um, and Amazon, which is not an independent store, but so yeah, if you're on Amazon, you can buy it there. But I strongly recommend buy the album at places like Rough Trade. But people love cassettes, I think, because it looks like a tiny thing that they can hold in their hands. I think people love tangible
Mm,
things, and
yeah,
it's almost a greeting card, if you will, a reminder postcard from the
right.
artist to the listener. But I'm sure there's a whole group of people who are too cool beyond me who are actually only listening to the music through like a Walkman, you
Mm.
know, and more power to them. I think that's very cool.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, yeah, I remember when I was younger being absolutely that with my Walkman, then a CD player, and that was like my prized possession, though. And yeah, I sometimes feel a bit sad that I've lost that a little bit. So maybe it's time to bring it back.
It is. I mean, you'd be surprised. The first thing that sells out with all my releases, the first thing that sells out, which is a very like, it's almost like a silent group of people. They don't talk much about it, but the first thing that sells out are tapes, which is
Mm.
really surprising. And you ask anybody who makes tapes, they'll share the same story. They're the most popular thing, and we are all curious about where it's all going. But I think there are very cool people out there who are harkening back to our days of like making mixtapes and
Right.
like pirating music that way. I did it. It's unfortunate, but we all did it.
Oh
So
yeah. Well, I mean, these days, perhaps streaming is kind of the same thing. So,
I'd rather people pirate from tapes than Spotify because Spotify is straight up daylight piracy.
right. It's yeah, that's just piracy that's legal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. I won't. I
But
won't keep this bit on Spotify.
yeah. I mean, it is what it is. This is the world we live in, and I'm embracing Spotify, Apple, because honestly, our listeners also find it easy to use these apps, and I think they've done a really good job in
As a listener,
because
it's great. Yeah.
exactly. I
Um,
mean, I use Spotify to discover new music, and then I go buy the vinyl, which is exactly what I recommend you all do.
that's
So,
it. It's that. Yeah, the next bit, the merchandise and I like what you said there about it being like a postcard from something direct from the artist to yeah to the listener. I think
yeah,
that's really really nice, particularly when you're supporting independent artists who are putting a lot of time and energy for often very little return into it. Yeah, any of these other things that you can do and to kind of strengthen that relationship a little bit as well. I
yeah.
think that's a really cool idea. Um, so okay, yes. If you're happy to keep on chatting, let's talk about the sex issue.
I have all the time for you.
Well, thank you. So yeah, tell us. So there's one more track, and then that's the sex issue complete.
That's the fifth single that's dropping.
Okay.
The Sex Issue is 15 tracks.
Okay.
two of which are only going to show up on vinyl
Right. Hmm.
and tape. Because it's, the listener who takes that extra step to buy the vinyl and tape deserve to listen to those tracks, because there's two really beautiful tracks and I'll talk about them. But the 15 tracks, the sex issue is really about, it's part autobiographical, part observation of my lonely generation. We live in a world where we have all this access to technology, porn, dating apps, and it's so easy to meet people. But it's very technology driven, and we're working harder than ever. And a lot of people in my generation, have student loans and so many things to worry about here in America. In the UK, it's quite different. But in America, or in the US, we don't know if we're going to have social security, for example. So our generation has so many stresses, and there have been study after study that we're having less sex than ever, despite all this access.
Mm.
And why is that? So I wrote the sex issue to really understand and talk about sexuality of my generation and to give a full spectrum of it. There is euphoria, there is humor, there's laughter, there is sadness, there's anger, there's disgust, there is disappointment, as a part of our experience of sexuality. And the way the sex issue tackles sexuality isn't the unfortunate overproduced sexuality that you see in a lot of mainstream pop videos, where it's unattainable sexuality. It is sexuality that's real, that belongs to a real human, which has got all its beautiful sides and the not beautiful sides. And the way to tackle sexuality is not just the ability to have sex, it's the ability to feel beautiful and feel good, and the space that you're living in, the space my body is taking up, is a space I'm entitled to, that I feel beautiful in. This is I'm unabashedly feeling the life force and the spirit and the beauty of me. That to me is a feeling, and that feeling is sexuality. So I've come to a conclusion that sexuality isn't just the capacity to have sex, it's a feeling like joy and sorrow.
Mm.
I have great sexuality, and it just makes you suddenly so beautiful and feel great about yourself, which makes it even more attractive to a potential mate. So the sex issue, starts from, there's an arc to it where, it starts from coming to understand that you're a sexual being, coming to terms with their sexuality, particularly if you're a queer person. We say, every queer person, there's a rite of passage. Every queer person will come out someday. But I have, talked to enough straight people that they have their own special rites of passages where, the first time they have a period or they ejaculate, it's a crazy moment. And so coming to terms with understanding that we are sexual beings, to the point that we start dating online, to the point we get into relationships, to the point the relationships fall apart. Like Pulchritude of Loss is about which is last single. It's about a long-term relationship and how to embrace the ebbs and flows of lovelessness, and how to bring it back, and how to embrace it going away, because long-term relationships are work. And so Pulchritude of Loss is really embracing the beauty of the loss, and a loss of what you had once and which you may not have now, but could come back again. It's a really beautiful song, and the sentiment is really beautiful there. So, and then there's songs about abuse, like Unfurler is about abuse, and abuse isn't a crime of isn't a sex crime. It is a crime of power. It is a crime of it's a violent crime, and really driven by anger and power. But it does impact our sexuality in that it permanently dents and reshapes our sexuality, which we can only manage in the future. And I know this firsthand, and I know this from my experience with other people too. It changes something, and unless you're aware of how it changes it, it's you just have to manage it.
Mm.
And life, you can still live a well-adjusted, beautiful life, but it is different. It is more empowered and it is more aware. So it talks about all of this. It talks about the effect of sadness and depression on sexuality, the effect of a happy relationship and how it impacts sexuality, polyamory. It has a song called Master, which is entirely about, bondage and fetishes.
Kind of.
Yeah. It's a fun song. And there's another song called Objectify Me, which is the actual track, which is not going to be on digital. And Objectify Me is me asking to be objectified so we don't fall in love, because love means a whole different thing. And so, and it also tries to carve out, is there a difference between, is there a split between sex and love?
Mm.
And is objectification not just sexual? It could also be a badge of honor, like, or a trophy. Um, um, so it's getting into areas beyond sexuality.
Mhm.
So it's a very complex and beautiful and dancey album, but also like reflective
With
album.
lots of layers in there. Yeah, amazing. And did you, so with such a concept, I guess, for the full album, did you sit down and decide before writing, this is, I'm going to write a song about this particular topic within that, or did it come about a little bit more naturally?
So I wrote this album, like some songs in this album, I wrote like 4 or 5 years ago, and some songs just came immediately, like BBC, which stands for Big Brown Cock.
Yeah.
Um, it's a porn category, which stirred up a lot of
And I
interesting.
also love that in the video as well, you're also thinking about the BBC TV broadcasting, right?
Right,
With this,
exactly.
there's a great, it was like when the TV wasn't on and there was like the little person with
The
the
test
funny
card.
suit. Yeah, yeah, with the oh, it's just great. It's such a good video.
Like
Um,
Brits would get it. It's like a classic test card, which
Test card,
everybody
that's
knew
it.
exactly. We should also talk about BBC because it stirred up a controversy at multiple levels, from straight and queer people, from black and brown people within that. It was
Mm.
really interesting. Um, we'll put a pin on that. But it came about just over the last, really the core of the album came about the last 2 years. And once I started writing songs, what came out was really about relationships. And then I read this article in the Atlantic magazine, which is a really well thought through, well written, magazine, about, what does sex and a lonely generation mean? And that really just spurred a whole set of songs about it, because there's so much. I mean, I almost want to do a sex issue part two, because there's just so much to talk about it. I still haven't talked about body positivity in there yet. I haven't talked about there are a bunch of the topics around sexuality to talk through. So
So there's more to come.
more to come. Definitely.
And will each of these have a video as well? Is that part of the plan, or
Repeat the question.
will each of these have a video as well? So the next songs to come out
Ah,
as the album.
there are 5 videos to this album, and you've already seen 4 of them. And the fifth one is Pulchritude of Floss, which shows a couple doing some interesting, crazy things. It's a very trippy, psychedelic video. With again a very it's a surrealistic video. It was done by director Lisa Bustani, who's known for her surreal work. She's Persian French, and she came all the way from France to like get this going. And yeah, it's very surreal. So that's the last video that's going to drop for the entire album. I'm toying with the idea of making a video, a very scrappy, like an iPhone only video, in the vein of, have you seen the movie Tangerine, which is about,
Mm. No.
it's trans culture in LA. It's entirely shot on an iPhone.
Mm.
It is beautiful and it's gripping and it'll make you cry. Like, it is so well done. So I want to do something I want to play with, instead of having something overproduced
Mhm.
with a giant beautiful rig. How can you do this scrappily but really work on the looks and the story and all that,
Mm.
for a song called Feel, which I think which is a total dance bop. It's like um, Donna Summers meets Kraftwerk. It's that.
Okay, great. I'm there for that. I'm there for that combination. um, so one final question. So you've already recommended, I think, some films and some directors. Are there any other queer music makers that that are on your radar that our listeners should check out?
Absolutely. So, gosh, there are at so many levels. Um, there is a community that we're all a part of, which are independent, emerging, and established musicians that, we talk to each other. We met each other through social media, through other playlists, through places like the Queer Review or the queer charts, and through forums like these.
Mm.
Um, and and then one of my friends, Kisos, he runs a show called Quarantine,
Yes,
which
I've been on Queertine myself. I wouldn't be surprised if that's how I found you as well. I found loads of people through Queertine.
right, so there is a community, and it's a
Yeah,
massive and very strong community. And I highly recommend people check out every person on that playlist. And so after our talk, we can share, what those playlists are to check out every artist on that. There are too many to name. And there's this other, which is not really a part of community, but sort of satellites floating around. I love the work that Shamir's done. I like I love the range Shamir's had.
mhm.
Uh, and then Shamir's voice is also quite very special.
Mm.
Um, Perfume Genius is also, you know, um, he's a great writer. So I love his writing. I think Saint Vincent has, she's established.
Mm.
She's pretty mainstream in that sense. I love Moses Sumney.
Yeah, oh, me too. Mhm.
His writing and his vocals are just beautiful. I think Serpent with Feet, their vocals are just absolutely gorgeous.
I'm not familiar. This is a new one for me, so I'll need to check them out. Okay.
Yeah, Serpent with Feet, and actually, Serpent with Feet has collaborated with actually Bjork a couple of years ago. So those are the names that just come off the top of my mind. I mean, there's so many other queer artists in like the big mainstream world. There's Tracy Sivan, I think, might be queer. I want to say, if I'm wrong, please don't quote me on it, but I think he
Yeah.
is. Um, yeah, so there are some queer artists, and I'm trying to really think. You put me on the spot because there's just so many
I know
lists.
it's a hard, yeah, hard to think
Yeah.
when yeah.
But those are some names that I
But well, great. That's some places to start, I would say. Well, thank you so much for chatting to me, and I hope everybody enjoys listening to Ash Divine, and do check out all his other work as well. So thank you very much, Ash.
thank you, Ben. It was truly, truly a pleasure, and a lot more to come. So keep an eye out for that. And I'm so privileged and honored to be your first guest, and I
Oh.
can't wait for this podcast to just bloom.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great having you on.
All right, talk soon.